Hello and welcome to another episode of Box Trek. I'm your host, Matt Brady, joined today by Jakejames Lugo. JJ, I've seen you over on TikTok, man.
Mhm.
Loving all the stuff. I then
Thank
followed you
you.
on YouTube and everything, and you're just like cranking out content. So
Mhm.
how is it going, man?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. Nice to meet you, to chat with you like this. I think it's cool because I've seen you. Obviously, I've watched your stuff on TikTok because, again, when we're scrolling through the For You page, stuff, things just pop up. And sometimes you just start interacting with people, you start liking stuff, and it just kind of just grows on you over time.
Yeah.
So this is fun. This is cool. It's great. It's great to meet more people within our space, and just to like interact in a fun way rather than just the
Yeah.
craziness of social media.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, TikTok is such a wild it's like the Wild West out there still. It's
Facts.
just
Yeah.
like you like something and then suddenly the next thing you know, everybody's just popping up in your feed and I'm just seeing it and I'm just like, man, I look on your TikTok page and you're just cranking out
A
videos
lot.
about like all sorts of stuff. And I'm like, wow, he does not just, you're talking about retro and all this stuff. And I was like, we have a lot of the same interests and everything. So I was like, I got to reach out and just wanted to see if you come on and
Yeah.
we can chat some games and just whatever. So
Yeah.
however it goes. So what we're gonna be doing today is just what I call game chat, where we're just gonna talk about 3 games that we're just playing or have played recently. Can be any game, sort of what we're playing, maybe what we're enjoying, just whatever.
Cool.
So I'll go first, just sort of kick it off here.
Mhm.
And this is the year for Zelda Tears of the Kingdom.
Yeah.
And so my goal was to go back and replay all the Zeldas in order to get ready. And I
Mm.
started that journey at the beginning of last year. That didn't happen. But I did get
Much for
through.
that plan.
Yeah, that did not happen, but I have gotten through a couple of them. And oddly, the one I'm going to talk about today, which I sort of finished just like maybe like a few weeks ago, was A Link to the Past. And
Good game. Good,
honestly,
solid one. Solid game.
it's like I've talked a lot about Zelda on my channel and on TikTok and everything, but it's so weird because I guess I missed A Link to the Past growing up, right? I would
Mhm.
say that my journey with Zelda really sort of started it actually started with Zelda 2, although I really had
Mm.
no idea that that's what it was because Zelda 2 is like its own
Yeah, it's like an
thing.
anomaly in the series. It's like the black
E
sheep of the whole series.
yeah, so I remember playing this game, like Legend Zelda 2 on the
Mm.
NES, like my cousin's house, my aunt's and house, and everything like that, and not really thinking anything more about it. I had no idea what Zelda 1 was. It's, before the internet, it's the 90s.
Yeah.
And then, the N64 came out, and I didn't have an N64
Mm.
initially. I was a PlayStation guy. And so I remember going over to one of my buddy's house and we were playing Smash Brothers.
Mm.
And there was this character in it who I was using. And I was like, who's this guy? And because I was a Sega kid too. So Sega, then to PlayStation. So I wasn't as big into Nintendo. And his name was Link. And I was like, okay, cool. And then they had a little section where you could go and look up information onto who
Yeah.
these
Tell you what's
characters,
up.
tell you what games they were in, even on the one from the N64. I was like, oh, this is that guy from Zelda 2. Well, that's cool. So I totally skipped Link to the Past. And then Ocarina of Time came out and Majora's Mask and everything.
Yeah.
But for just whatever reason, I played Link's Awakening. I just never went back and played A Link to the Past.
Mm.
So I played like all the other Zeldas just for whatever reason. So having gone back and played it sort of recently, man,
Mhm.
like ashamed at myself for having missed, A Link to the Past growing up
Yeah.
because there's so much about it that I get now. And I almost have this like sense of loss having like played it, not for the first time, but really like diving in, just playing it sort of without a guide, just to really sort of dive in and experience it for what it is.
Mm.
And of course, I now have the advantage of having played so many other Zelda games that I'm much more familiar than if I had played it when it initially came out and would have been new. But
Yeah.
man, it's just sort of this like sense of loss of like, wow, I really think I would have enjoyed this as a kid, back when you
Mm.
didn't have responsibilities and didn't have all these
A simpler
things. And
time.
you could just in the summer, play games. And so, yeah. So now
Mm.
that's just kind of where I'm at. So I'm guessing you've obviously
Yes.
played it. Yeah.
So I reviewed it a while back on my YouTube channel because at some point I went back to the older Zelda games. I did Zelda, the original NES Zelda, I did Zelda 2, and I did Link to the Past at one point. And the original plan for me was to continue onward because I was going to do Ocarina of Time, I was going to do Majora's Mask, and eventually Wind Waker. But time with everything, because
Right.
I do so much content like every single week, I'm playing different games all the time, and things, new developments happen, other games come out that I have to give attention to. It gets a little crazy. But one of the things that I will say about Link to the Past, having played it in full, because I was first exposed to Link to the Past years ago when I was younger, like in the 90s or late 90s, I want to say, like before the Nintendo 64 came out, because I had a friend where we used to do this thing when we were younger where we got a console, in our family and stuff, but we always had friends that owned other consoles. So sometimes,
Right.
like, if I was the Genesis guy, which I was a Genesis kid growing up, I had a friend that had a Super Nintendo, and eventually another friend that had a PlayStation at some point. And so I ended up getting my own PS2 down the line. And I would go to my friend's house every once in a while, and he would have a lot of the big classics for the Super Nintendo, including Super Mario World, which I still think is one of the best SNES games of all time,
Oh
best
yeah.
Mario game of all time, Link to the Past, Donkey Kong Country. I believe he also had Final Fantasy 2, if I'm not mistaken, or the Super Mario All Stars like collection. At one point, he had a bunch of them like that. And that's how I got exposed to a lot of them, including Link to the Past. But I never fully appreciated it back then because I feel like everybody at some point, whenever they're playing games, especially if you grew up with gaming and you have like, that in the whole like upbringing with video games in your life, there are certain games that were probably big deals back then that you don't really understand that how big they were until later on in life, when you either get to play them or when you get to hear other people talk about them or expose you to elements of them, which I felt a lot of that about the Super Nintendo library. Because again, coming from the Sega side of things, there were other games I obviously didn't play during my youth. Again, like Super Metroid was another big one.
Right.
Chrono Trigger, I didn't play until much later on. I didn't even play the PlayStation port of that, until much later on. I played I believe it was the DS port at one point where I really sat down and just played through that. But Link to the Past is one of those games I feel that doesn't get enough credit for how much of an influence it had on Ocarina of Time and other Zelda games that came afterwards. I feel like once you get to Link to the Past, that's the prototype, or that's the archetype for the modern Zelda game, straight up. Because even in Ocarina of Time, the three gems, getting the Master Sword,
Mhm.
even elements of like the Dark Realm, the duality of realms and places that you visit, Ganon, at least the way that stuff plays out, the cold open, or at least the opening where it's like you're running around with Zelda at the very beginning and stuff before things start to really get crazy. A lot of those elements and a lot of those things you could find in many other Zelda games that came afterwards. And it's a game that gets a lot of praise, but it really deserves a little bit more credit for a lot more of those nuanced things you don't appreciate till later on in life.
Yeah, I also don't think people really realize, looking back now, when you're looking back at like the Super Nintendo library, I mean, it's really difficult, I think, to even begin to sort of compare games to it, because it's just so much more in depth. The story is so much more involved. I mean, outside of the big RPGs on the Super Nintendo, it's really difficult, I'd say, to find a game that has as much going on in it as A Link to the Past. You just sort of lack like A Link to the Past is more linear than the two games that had preceded it. Obviously,
Yeah,
the originals really open. I think it's still fine because the world is huge in its own right. I mean,
big
you
time.
have Hyrule, and then you get to go to the Dark World. There's secrets going back and forth. I mean, I can't
Mhm.
even imagine what it would have been like to have played that one.
Oh, you need Nintendo Power, straight up. Like back then,
Yeah, I mean,
even.
there's just no way. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
it's crazy, it does. Replaying it was kind of bringing me back, to I don't know how old you are. I turned 35 and
Oh, you're my age.
later
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
later
There
this
you go.
year.
You're my
Okay,
age. We're
yeah,
right
yeah,
the
yeah.
same generation. Like,
Yeah, okay, yeah, exactly. So, it's like, you just remember back in those days of like riding on the bus, and
mhm,
you're in school and everyone's like, "Oh, dude, you got to do this, or you got to do this." This is
mhm.
before, like even good dial up where you could get online and
This is
like and
pre-internet.
look.
This is all pre-internet mostly.
Right. And even if you did have the computer, and computers were crazy expensive,
Yes.
until you hit around like 98. into like 2000. I mean,
Yeah.
computers were expensive. And a lot of people had dial-up until like
You
2007.
know what other
People
people
don't
also
really
did?
realize that.
You know what people also did? Because I did this for years, up to the point where my family got a computer, go to the public library and use the
Mhm.
actual terminals there. That's where you actually had access to both the computer and also internet. That's how I played RuneScape for a long time. And
Oh
that's
yeah,
AOL
yeah.
to Instant Messenger. That's how I got exposed to all that. And then Sega Sages, which eventually turned into
Right.
IGM, which,
Right.
that's how it all starts.
Yeah. Oh, I took computer classes in high school, just so that I could like look up, and I was like, I wanted to be my first period because you get in and everyone's sitting on the computer, so I'd have like extra time at school to like go to like it was like old like this is I mean IGN was like a thing, but there was other websites like gamers.com. I think that just like disappeared and or turned into something. Games Radar.
N64.com, Games Radar.
Games Radar used to be Cheat Code Central.
Mhm.
It was like here's cheats and stuff like that. And you'd look them up, and there was all sorts of stuff that people wrote on there that weren't true at
Complete
all.
nonsense.
Right. There's like the one in Final Fantasy where it's like you can get the Bronco, the little ship, right, and go fly it again, or you can get Aerith back. It's like, no, you can't. Like, but it was the Wild West out there. But yeah,
Yeah.
so A Link to the Past, right? I mean, obviously you sit and talk for hours about how
Yeah,
great
that
it is.
game
But
is immaculate. Immaculate game.
yeah, but I would say that sort of my biggest takeaway just from sort of really diving into it and beating it for honestly like the first time is just I don't know, maybe it's as I get older I find myself becoming maybe for nostalgic for games I didn't really grow up with. Like, you just go back and sometimes you play this game and I just sort of think of like, man, this game would have been like perfect for me when I was a kid, and this is one of them. Because I think you just look at, it's not like today where you can just get on Steam and you can go buy any game you want, right? Like you only had certain games, you only had certain systems, you only had whatever growing up. And so I don't know, I just felt this sort of like wave of nostalgia. Even playing this game, I never really played
Yeah.
growing up, but absolutely, obviously, it's amazing and deserves
Yeah.
all of the
Yeah.
credit
That game is
that it gets.
immaculate. It's a fantastic game. I still personally think it holds up even now. Like people like if you want to show the better parts of the Zelda series, that's one of the games I feel like you give them in the top 5 to go play. Like if you're
Mhm.
gonna get away from new releases coming out like currently and stuff, and you got to go into your backlog and stuff, that's one of the Zelda games I would tell people to play because it's so. To me, I still think it has its issues here and there. Like I think there are certain sections and certain points where you definitely need a guide to know exactly what you need to do
Yeah.
or where you need to go. But like when you really kind of like get engrossed into it, it's an awesome, fantastic game. Definitely an iconic one of that console.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, all right. Hey, I'll toss it over to you.
Mhm.
What's one of the games you've been playing recently?
So I'm gonna go more modern than the one that you suggested now. I'm actually gonna talk about Jedi Fallen Order because I actually went
Ooh.
back to Jedi Fallen Order not so long ago. I played and beaten Jedi Fallen Order, the PS4 version, because I did a whole video review of it on my channel where I got into huge detail with that game. But getting ready for Jedi Survivor very soon. At the time we're recording this, like a month or so away, give or take. And I went back to the PlayStation 5 version that went on PS Plus to go check out the challenges that you get from like the save points and stuff. And it just got me thinking a little bit more about that game and thinking about like modern Star Wars games going into the newer ones coming out, which is Jedi Survivor and whatever else we're going to get from like Ubisoft and afterwards. What makes Jedi Fallen Order so good to me and so such a standout is that it's one of the first, probably the only modern Star Wars game in the EA era that really stands on its own 2 legs, that doesn't have anything previously like holding it up, to give it
Like
attention.
Battlefront or what?
Like
Yeah.
Battlefront, really Battlefront 2, Battlefront 1, etc. But also even Squadrons, I would argue, because Squadrons also has the legacy to live up to, but not only the X-Wing series, but also the Rogue Squadron series, which I think that
Right.
a lot of people were comparing it to. But with Jedi Fallen Order, this was something different. It borrowed a lot of elements from the Soulsborne genre, from like Dark Souls, Bloodborne, etc. And you could even throw an Elden Ring in there. But with this one is that it took that concept, which is so notorious for being difficult for people, but really kind of like streamlined it and put it in the Star Wars universe and made it interesting. And made it just fun to be part of that. Because real talk, I don't like the Soulsborne genre. I really have a strong, not hatred, but a strong antagonistic attitude
Right.
and vibe to that whole genre for many reasons. Like there's good aspects to them, but like at the time when I first played Jedi Fallen Order, I really wasn't feeling that genre at all. But this was the one that really kind of got me to like rethink my stance on it and really kind of like appreciate some of the better elements, for what they were. And again, I like Cal Kestis as a character. I like his backstory. I like a lot of the reverence that game had, specifically for Star Wars lore and the timeline and the place in the timeline where it actually takes place, because it's post Order 66, like a number of years after Order 66 and prior to the events of A New Hope and Kenobi and stuff. So it has a nice spot and also has a respect for the lore and the canon, while also just giving us brand new stuff that fits nicely into everything. And I always thought that was a really cool thing. That was probably, and again, in my opinion, the best EA Star Wars game that we ever got within this modern era of Star Wars games.
Yeah, absolutely. What's interesting is you actually just stole the one I was going to talk about, but that's okay. I can swap in something else because I actually just started a replay of this Let's Play over my Star Wars channel, and it's honestly, I think when I first played it, I guess I don't know why I actually didn't like it as much as I am now. Like replaying, I thought it was good. Of course, you get to as this what Zepho or whatever the planet
Dathomir.
is.
Dathomir. That's the hard one.
Dathomir's okay, but Zepho's the one where you have just like terrible backtracking.
Oh yeah.
True, and so it was just one of those things where it's like, God, the backtracking in this game is awful.
Yeah.
But outside of that, honestly, it's really good, and the ending is so amazing.
Yeah,
the story,
awesome.
Once I got to it, I really appreciated it, but I just didn't end up never like really diving back in and playing it. So now with Jedi Survivor coming out, I actually just started a Let's Play of it. And replaying it is so much fun, especially because I'm playing it on PC and I'm going back and adding like lightsaber mods and outfit mods and everything like that, and replaying it. And honestly, sort of now that I know what to expect, going in and replaying this game, it is actually a lot better than I think I sort of remembered. And maybe it's just because my, rose-colored glasses causes me to remember like, oh, the story elements are awesome, but God, some of the middle is just like a little weak. But replaying it now, I'm like, no, actually, this is really, really good. Like the storytelling, the motion capture, everything.
The writing's awesome.
Yeah. And now that I've get to see a little bit of what Cal's story will be like going forward in Jedi Survivor, it's really interesting to go back and kind of look and be like, okay, what's actually going on here? What clues did they already potentially have looking at this? Because I think one of the interesting things I remembered from this game was, one of the main plot points is they're searching for a Jedi holocron.
Yeah.
That contains the names of a lot of the people who survived Order 66. Well,
Force sensitive kids, basically.
Right. At that point, when that game came out, we didn't know, because I think it came out in 2019. So it came out before Rise of Skywalker and before The Mandalorian.
Yeah, it came. That's right.
Actually, I think it came out right because I think 2019 was when I think it came out in just before, like a few months before Rise of Skywalker, and because Rise of Skywalker was December. So this would have came out before. So at that point, we weren't really like, okay, whatever. It's just Star Wars does this because they need to introduce new characters. And hey, guess what? It's another Jedi who survived Order 66, right? Okay, here we go.
Going back to it.
Here we go again. But I guess now we didn't realize, that in the Kenobi show, Obi-Wan's going to find this wall with like Quinlan Voss's name written on it and all these Jedi who may have survived Order 66 and how that could tie into something. And it's like, okay, now it's getting a little bigger. Now it's getting a little more interesting. I mean, obviously Jedi Fallen Order is so good that in the Kenobi show, they were like, hey, we're just going to rip off the entire plot.
Exactly. The whole section there in that show, ripped straight from the game.
Oh my God. Like, so over my Star Wars channel, I was like going off about how I was like that episode of Kenobi. I was like,
it's second sister Reva.
I literally have videos where I'm like, it is frame for frame the same thing, and it takes place at the same place like 5 years later in the story. Don't get me started. I like aspects of Kenobi, but I think overall the whole
I feel you.
overall the whole package I have some I have some issues with.
I feel you.
But so regardless, I mean, the game is still really cool. I think Malicos was a really cool sort of idea. Fight. Yeah, as idea for a villain. Vader might have been a little much at the end. I mean, it was awesome to see it, but it's it's kind of like, I don't know. Sometimes I think about, like, do we need Vader? Does it sort of, I mean, it's great for the game. Game wise, it's
It
great.
was
But
an
I guess in
awesome
terms of,
surprise. For what it was at the end, it was an
right.
awesome surprise.
Yeah. Yeah. So for the bigger Star Wars universe, though, I'm like, should we save Vader a little bit? Right. Should he be this thing? I mean, when Vader's going one-on-one with like Kanan Jarrus a little bit there, and and Rebels, it's like, okay, come on now. Vader's supposed to be awesome. But then at least in Kenobi, we got to see him be like stupid powerful, which is great. But yeah, I mean, overall, the game is great. I think I was also, when I first played it, was kind of, for whatever reason, maybe comparing it a little bit to Force Unleashed, where I was like, that's the kind of game where you really just
Well,
go
that
in.
takes
But
takes
they're
the Force really far,
right.
and but
Yeah,
it was
they're
easily
totally
compared to
different.
it. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
easily compared to it. But what I liked about this one is that, again, because it borrows elements from Soulsborne stuff, it makes a lot of the worlds around you, or at least that part of the Star Wars universe, feel very intimidating. Because, like, Cal goes up against a lot of these like giant creatures and stuff like that, and like you have a lightsaber. That doesn't mean that you're going to totally own these things. Like, they could still like brutalize you in that same way
Yeah.
that you would see in a Soulsborne game.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that the sequel, just looking at the trailers we've already seen, I think Cal's going to be quite a bit more powerful in
You
this
have more to
next
do.
game. Yeah, and I think it'll be like one of those things where it's like, maybe this turns into a trilogy, which I think is maybe what they're going for. I kind of hope so.
I wouldn't be
It'll be
surprised.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be kind of like when you go back and play Arkham. Like when I last year I did a replay of all the Arkham games,
Mm.
and it was kind of like when I went back to play Arkham Asylum for the first time. It's like, 'cause Asylum's the one I never go back to. I mean, it's obviously
City's where it's at, though.
yeah, but yeah, City is my favorite, and then Night, and even Origins. The combat just evolves so much more as the series progresses. So when you go back to Asylum, like, oh yeah, I can't just really like fly around. I can't do this. Not that the game is still like an absolutely amazing game,
Yeah.
but I think that'll be kind of the thing here too, where we'll remember the first game, like, oh, the first game had a really good story, but it'll be like this next game, which is where it's like, oh, the combat's more evolved, everything, and it'll be really. So it was a Jedi Survivor is an amazing first step into whatever this
Yeah.
is going to become.
Yeah, I can't wait to play it. Again, I got it on pre-order and stuff. Funny enough, the funny thing for me is that I have a perspective. I know someone who's working on it, that they're one of the people that have been doing some cool stuff, that they kind of given us some insight in it. And it's giving me more excited because I know there's even more time and effort that went into this sequel. That obviously, with Jedi Fallen, even though a lot of time and effort went into both games and
Right.
stuff, but like seeing what worked and what didn't work, what could have been improved from the first game, now going into this one, I think a lot of Star Wars fans are going to be very, very happy by the time we play this.
Yeah, I have no doubt that it's going to be an absolutely amazing game. Okay, well, I guess thankfully I did have a backup,
Hmm.
so I still have two more things I can dive into here.
Cool.
So I guess November had a big game release, and I haven't had the chance to talk about it here on the podcast
Mhm.
yet. And want maybe your thoughts on this too, because I'm guessing you probably played it. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet.
I didn't play it, but I did get
Oh,
some
okay.
insight into it because I skipped over this because there's other
Yeah.
games that I was excited about, for the end of the year that I wanted to play. But I have been looking at some stuff, like obviously the starters and everything that
Right.
people have been sharing and such.
Yeah, so I have to say it is in some ways the most disappointing Pokemon game I've ever played.
I
In
heard the frame
others,
rate was bad on it. There's
it's real bad.
bugs, glitches,
It's
presentations all
it's
messed up.
yeah, it's in some ways it's so disappointing, and in other ways it's like it improves some things so much that it's like I don't ever want that to change
Hmm.
in Pokemon. So, I mean, obviously the huge changes to it. It's sort of the first, I guess, open world Pokemon game, which in some ways is good, and
Arceus, I thought Arceus would be the first open world, quote unquote.
yeah, I guess
Mm,
mainline in the
mm.
main
Mainline, yeah,
core,
true.
right, in the main core. But here you kind of can go wherever you want, like from the get-go. Arceus, you still have like a kind of lengthy tutorial, and you're kind
Mhm.
of this, it's like it's pretty open, which is really cool. In some ways I like it, and in some ways I don't. You know, I think it's more difficult to sort of compare, say, like Pokemon with being linear and say Zelda with linear, because
Mm.
Zelda is linear, but there's still a lot of secrets along the way. There's a lot of
Yeah.
other things. Pokemon, I kind of feel like benefits a little bit more from being linear in that some of the ways in which you progress in Pokemon, like really when you sit down and you sort of think about like the Pokemon mechanic, it's almost like each new area feels like a new step in the right direction. It feels like a new
Yeah.
challenge, and it sort of gets progressive along the way. Here, not some things kind of scale and some things don't. So
Mm.
it's like kind of weird the way, I think sort of the way they do it. And it felt like every new region you went to sort of mattered. Where here, it because they open it up, it's kind of just like, okay, well, I'm actually just looking for the gym, like, see you later. Which isn't,
Mm.
which sometimes is the case depending on how powerful you are. Sometimes it isn't. So I think it's like just the idea of the open world in some ways works, some ways doesn't. It's maybe it's just new, and it's like
Mm.
haven't spent enough time with it. You need to see it fleshed out in a couple other games.
You know something, bringing that up, that kind of reminds me that the same type of effect that I guess you're starting to see more often now post Breath of the Wild, because Breath of the
Right.
Wild was the exact same way for the Zelda
Right.
series, where Zelda, like you mentioned, is a lot more linear for all extensive purposes, where you could deviate and do side quests, but like you're still going on a path like that. And
Right.
Pokemon, ever since Pokemon Red and Blue, whatever, has always been like that. Even Gold and Silver, which had more areas to go to, but it was still like you were on a guided path, even though you could do multiple things in there. I think what happens is that we're so kind of like programmed with a lot of these series to kind of be like that. Most
Mhm.
games are linear by nature. So, and even with open world games like a Grand Theft Auto or something, you're still going to the mission areas. You have a general idea of like where to go, what regions to visit first, or what areas you should be visiting first, as opposed to just going off and doing everything on your own. It's not like in Mega Man, where Mega Man you could argue is a little bit more non-linear compared to most other games, where you could do the Robot Masters in every single order that you want, even though there's a preferred order. You're not tied to that specific order. You could go to
Right.
whatever place. With these games, because of how like certain things don't scale, I still feel like you lose that element for it, and it kind of
Yeah.
makes it a little bit more difficult to kind of deal
Yeah.
with stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think the other difference is sort of compare it to I'll take Xenoblade for example. So I would say that the difference is in Pokemon, because everything is sort of type based, you can go get a like level 20 electric, and now it's like, because you do run into regions and there are stronger Pokemon in certain regions of the game, of the area you're playing, but now there's no more random encounters, so
Yeah.
everything is just open, so I can just skip it and go
Mm.
get this. um and now, it's not like back in the day where you had to wait to get fly or you had to wait to get surf. You can just kind of go, do whatever, and you can unlock a point and fly there. So I guess that's like the open worldness to it is just
Mm.
something that I don't know that it's necessarily good or bad. It's just different.
Yeah.
Some other things that they did change that's really cool is now they have, I guess, kind of in a way, like there's three main categories. Like it's no longer just only the gyms. Now you have these titans, which are like big Pokemon you got to go fight, and then that sort of powers up this legendary that's running with you that you can use as like a motorcycle and like fly around and swim and all these different things. So like it's kind of cool that they did sort of start to include that, as well as the team. I forget. I don't even remember what they're called in this because they're not that important. Um,
They're not
but
like Team Rocket or Team Magma or
yes,
anything.
yeah. So it's like now whatever Team Rocket you're fighting against in this game, which I'm just blanking on unnecessarily. Now, so like those are like your three things, which in some ways is like, okay, I can make that my focus now, is like to go knock out that quest path if you want. And then this other one, which I think is actually kind of cool, because especially like the Titan thing that they added, because now it's like, okay, I'm going to go fight these like huge versions of it, which would be sort of equivalent to like the raid battles you fought in Sword and Shield.
Yeah.
But they're out in the open and you can see them. So like that's a pretty cool addition. The just being able to do the battles with the Pokemon, like you just walk up and then they do it. Of course, I'm sure that caused frame rate issues, which is
Probably.
obviously on the bad side for
Yeah.
whatever reason, I guess. But the concept of that I think is cool, going forward. I still think I'm okay with random encounters. I kind of feel like Sword and Shield to me was the perfect blend of everything, where you have here's a big area you can go to that's open. Here's this, and you can figure it out however you want. I mean, obviously, then the bad thing is just the performance is
Yeah,
so
I heard that's a big problem with that game. That
yeah,
they really got a bad blowback from many
yeah,
fans about
and
it.
it's the I guess my issue with the performance isn't even that. Like, it'd be one, so like think about this for a second. The Witcher
Mm.
3 runs on the Switch.
Yeah, funny
Okay.
enough, some black
Yeah.
magic got that game
Yeah.
to run.
Doom Eternal runs
Runs on
on
the
the
Switch.
Switch, right?
Exactly.
It'd be one thing if you were trying to load these like massive open areas, but honest to God, some of them are like deserts, which there's nothing in, and it's like a field of brown. It's like,
Mhm.
how can you not load this? Like when I'm playing Xenoblade or Breath of the Wild or some of these other things. I think honestly, it was just more than Game
It
Freak
just wasn't
could
optimized right.
handle. I
They
think
just
it's
didn't do their
I
work.
just don't yeah, I just feel like it's just not. Maybe it's because they did Arceus and Brilliant Diamond and Pearl and this, and it was like a lot for that team. Maybe it's a small team, right? I mean, it's
True.
sort of, I guess, unfair to put all of those things on them. There's no like clothing options. Like you're just kind of
Yeah.
stuck to like 2 or 3, which in Sword and Shield there was tons of them.
Mm.
There's just there's a lot of things they change. You constantly it feels like the first 10 hours is a tutorial in this
Really?
game. Like
Like it feels dragged out.
every time you go do something new, it's like you have to sit through almost like a 10-minute like video, like not video, but like a cutscene.
Mm.
That you're just clicking through the text to get through. So I would say it's a swing and a miss for this game. And honestly, if you haven't played it, I would avoid it.
That's what
It's
everybody
not
keeps telling me because like I usually get to Pokemon games late. Like the last big Pokemon game, like mainline, I guess you could say, Pokemon game that I got into was Sun and Moon because I got
right,
that for my 3DS and stuff. And I think that was fine for what it was. Again, it's a Pokemon game. Like I feel like
right.
you don't have to dive into those games like day one. You don't always have to. If you're big into Pokemon, you're gonna do so anyway. Like one of the big ones that I thought that was good, that was a spin-off game was Pokken Tournament, because I just talked about that recently. And
Yeah,
I got
I just saw
big
your
into
thing.
that. I got big into that ever since it first came out on the Wii U, and I've been playing it like here and there, on
Yeah,
and off and stuff. And I think sometimes now Pokemon has gone to the point where it's like, they could start experimenting with a lot of different things off-site with its outside of its like mainline series and such, and see what other things could work to actually start getting things to go concurrently like that. But I even feel like maybe at some point, maybe Scarlet and such will get updated to the point where maybe things are a little bit stable, or they'll just completely drop it and move on to what's next. Because
yeah,
I feel like this one had such a big blowback, and it's so uncharacteristic of the Pokemon
right.
company when you really think about it.
Yeah,
Because it's not like they're always putting out garbage games. Because even most of the Pokemon spinoffs aren't always that great. Like, I mean, we got
right,
Pokemon Stadium, we have Pokemon Tournament, Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, which are all great for all their stuff.
right.
But then you get some of these other ones, like some people have never even heard of, like some random Pokemon
Oh yeah.
spin-off on like the DS or something, or Conquest. That was one. I know some people like Conquest, but it's like
You know which
you would have
one?
never
God,
thought of this.
what was the one they put out? Oh God, I played. Is it Pokemon Quest? It was like it was a mobile too. They released it as like a free.
Not
Uh,
Pokemon Go, but oh
no,
my
I think it
god,
was
because again,
Pokemon
so
Quest.
many. Oh my
You know what?
goodness.
I have my Switch right
You're
here.
gonna
I
check
have
this
my
out.
Switch right here. I will look it up.
There
But
was a
man, I
cafe
play.
game. There's a cafe
There,
game. That was a
yeah,
puzzle game.
there was the cafe game, but man, I went hardcore into that. I'll look it up here. But I think it was Pokemon Quest, and it was a
Mm,
mobile game, and it was free, and it was like a tap based game. It
mm.
was just really, but I mean, I got like hardcore into that. But I will say, Pokken Tournament was one that I really have always wanted to play. For whatever reason, I've never picked it up. But like, I'm a big 3D, I mean, Soul Calibur, Street Fighter, all that
That
stuff.
game, yeah.
Yeah, so it's always one that's been on my list. So I still
You know
may
what's
pick it up
crazy?
at some point.
You know what's crazy about that? And they kind of dropped the ball. Or at least it was Bandai Namco that really dropped the ball. They could have kept going with DLC with that, or did another iteration of that, because the concept of it is cool. The biggest problem with that game is the balance. straight up. Like, because I played it a lot, and I used to play a lot with Machamp and stuff, and it always felt like certain characters just didn't have an answer to a lot of other tools that other characters had, which is very important for fighting games. Like, you always want to have balance, especially for the competitive scene like that, because there was like a competitive scene for Pokken Tournament for a time, and then it just dropped, because
Yeah.
at some point, like, there's not much else that could be done if the company's not going to do anything else with it. But I
Right.
really do hope they one day revisit that actual concept, because I thought it was cool. Again, when we got
Yeah.
the DLC for DX, for the DX version, we had Blastoise in there, which was like really out there.
Right.
Like, there was all these other things that they could have done.
Yeah, I got into Pokemon Unite for a little bit,
Hmm.
and
That's
I
another
will
one.
say, yeah, I will say I like MOBAs. I got really into like Heroes of the Storm. I
Hmm.
never played League and these other things. So when it came out, I was like, oh, it's on the Switch. I can play it. I played it pretty like solid for about like 2 weeks, like, and then I put it down, put it back up, and then just moved on to the other thing. There's just too many games. You just can't keep up.
I really believe that. I think also the Pokemon crowd are the ones that are diehard Pokemon that usually get Pokemon everything and stuff. They're just certain genres that I just don't think they resonate with. They resonate with RPGs because that's what Pokemon is. It's like the first
Right.
like true streamlined JRPG for most people that isn't Final Fantasy. But like when you start branching off to things like outside of that, or outside of like, Pokemon Snap, or outside of Pokemon, the trading card game stuff, you start getting into these other genres which might work for it, but like that core crowd that's like always stuck with it, or the real core like audience for that series, I just don't think they're going to care about a lot of that stuff. A lot of them, if they're playing a game like that, a MOBA, they're already playing League. Why go to Pokemon
Right.
Unite at that point?
Right. Yeah, I think it's hard sometimes to try and say, "Hey, we're gonna take this genre and we're just gonna license it with our intellectual property and see if it works." I
Mhm.
think there's some things where it does. I mean, even you could say Blizzard did that, where they're like, "Hey, we're gonna
Yeah,
make Heroes of the Storm with our characters." Like, is the Blizzard cast of characters really that strong on its own? I
not
mean,
really.
really,
They got good
not really.
franchises. They got great franchises.
Yeah,
Diablo,
right.
Diablo's
Oh
that
yeah,
series, but still, like
yeah.
it's not like iconic where it's like you could get like a Smash Brothers S type of thing going for them.
Right. I mean, even PlayStation tried it. I
Yeah,
do think if PlayStation tried it again, I feel like they could pull it off.
their problem was at the very start of it. Number one, they tried so hard to be not like Smash Brothers, and everybody
Right.
wanted them to be like Smash Brothers. And number two, they
Right.
dropped the studio that they built to actually make that game.
Right.
They just completely disbanded them. And it's like, games like that, or again, fighting game franchises and competitive scenes need time to grow. And like you need
Right.
content to support it. And PlayStation has franchises they could have pulled from to make that game still keep going, and they just chose not to.
Yeah. I know. I did. Did you ever play? It was on. I think it was on PS2. I know it was on Wii because I have it for Wii. But there was a Ninja Turtle Smash Brothers game.
Yeah, I forgot the name of
Smash
it that
Up.
was called, but I did play
I think it's
that.
called. I think it's called TMT Smash Up. It
It's
was
very similar to the Nickelodeon All Star Brawl game. Now,
Right. Yeah. But it was good. I remember playing it. The difference though was that of course, now they've added this to Smash Brothers since, but they had a like a health bar which you could
yeah,
knock people out of. But it was actually, I mean, it kind of worked. And I've always thought that the Smash Brothers style of game could work so well. And I mean, hey, somebody has actually pulled it off, and that's DC. Well, not DC, Warner Brothers
yeah,
with multiverses. So
exactly.
I think that it works. You just, you need a good core of like characters. Like I've always thought that that Star Wars should do it. Like if you did
Star
a
Wars needs to stay away from the fighting genre. Period. They had a massive L. I reviewed that game for Masters of Terrascasi.
oh,
After
I've
that
yeah,
one,
I've,
they
I reviewed it.
they
Oh
need
yeah,
to
yeah,
stay far away from that genre.
yeah.
'Cause I should say that because there is a fan made mod slash game that was made that was a Force Combat
Force Combat.
that's
Yep.
pretty much like Mortal Kombat that does that
Yeah.
way for a 2D fighting game. So it can work. You just need the
Right.
right mind and the right team to put it
Well,
together.
I just made some shorts over my Star Wars channel about I just recently installed it through a PS3 emulation of Soul Calibur 4, where you can
Mm.
play Star Killer and
Yep.
Vader
Yep.
and well, Yoda's in the 360 version.
Yep.
But I mean that worked there. I mean, I just but I do think I do think the Smash Brothers style,
The
where
formula.
of
Yeah.
course yeah, I think Disney missed the bag by letting Warner
Oh
Brothers
yeah,
do it
hands down.
first.
Oh, they could have
But
been did that.
because I mean, because you could have had Darth Vader versus Iron Man, and
In
everyone would
their
be like, "Oh, this
defense,
is
though, in their defense, Disney did do Disney Infinity, which is the
right,
platformer version of it, and they also did kart racers too, because there's a lot of
right."
Mickey slash Disney kart racers that are exactly like that, like Mario Kart.
Right. Yeah. It's just a shame that we just don't have more Star Wars. Like when I think about that, I'm like, man, Star Wars would work. Just Star Wars alone would work
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
a Smash Brothers style thing. But hey, Warner Brothers is doing it with
Mhm.
Multiverse. Have you played Multiverses?
Oh, of course, yeah. Hands down. I
Yeah.
played that same opening week when it first came out and stuff, and it
Yeah.
was fun. It was cool. It's just again, you got with games like that, you got to stick with it, and especially if you
Right.
don't get the free version with it, you got to stick with it to be within that community. And again, a lot of those genres of games, they constantly fall victim to the comparison to Smash Brothers because they just did it so
Right.
well with that series. Like
Yeah.
that's like the easiest comparison for most
Because
people.
nobody
That's what
ever,
they expect.
because really nobody ever tried it for a long
Yeah.
time. I
Hmm.
mean, I think that's the difference is like, I mean, it's like nobody said no at this point. We did back in the day call everything a Doom clone. It's
Yeah.
like, oh,
Of course.
everything was a
Hexen
Doom
is a Doom
clone.
clone. That's
But
literally
now
like Doom with
but
fantasy.
yeah, but now they're all just first person shooters because the genre
Exactly.
has expanded. But I mean,
Mhm.
really, you have to think about it. I mean, Smash Brothers came out in probably 98,
98, 98, 99.
99, something
Yeah.
like that. Yeah.
Mhm.
And so then the next game that I can even think of that was somewhat close was that Ninja Turtles game. That would have been like 2008, but that's like
Yeah,
Ninja Turtles only. Then
true.
the next, I'd say, big one would have been PlayStation, which would have been 2000. I don't know, 9, so 9 at the earliest, probably 11 or something
No,
like that.
I think it was might have been a little
Some
bit later than that, yeah.
later,
Trying to
yeah.
recall.
So like
Yeah.
probably 11 or 12 as it was sort of towards maybe the middle to end to PlayStation library. So I mean, at this point, Smash Brothers is still going. So Multiverses is the first one. Really, that's even sort of
Like a
I mean, there's
legit
been others.
competitor.
Right. I mean, there's Brawlhalla and
Yeah.
some other things, but I think
Indie Pogo.
Multiverses,
Indie Pogo is another one that
right.
pretty much takes that same concept but puts everybody in it's indie characters from like various indie games, but makes
Yeah, that's
them
right.
like do like pogo
Yes.
sticks, like jumping.
Yep. Yeah. That's right. So it's just interesting, man. I think Star Wars alone would work. Of course, I mean, just do it with Disney because I mean,
Mm. They got so many.
A Disney Smash Brothers game would be awesome. I mean, you
Exactly.
could Buzz Lightyear and Darth Vader
Marvel.
and all the Marvel characters. Yeah, I
Lucasfilm, because you could
mean,
throw Indiana Jones and Willow in there too. Like,
yeah,
there's so many things. Like,
it just
it's
yeah,
ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
be absolutely so insane. Awesome. Okay, I don't know whose turn. I think it's your turn
I think
again.
it's
I think
mine. Yeah.
yeah.
Starting my number two. So technically, I'm going to use one that I actually did a review for today that I actually published today was the Lord of the Rings games, and I look at
Oh
them
yeah.
as one pair, which is both Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers and Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King, the two hack and slash games by EA. Now there was other games based on Lord of the Rings made by various companies, including a Fellowship of the Ring game, but that was all done by different people. It's not the EA games. Funny enough, I even said in the review Two Towers originally before that came out, they were going to do a Fellowship of the Ring game that was exactly like that. But because they couldn't get it out in time for the movie stuff, they just put all that stuff that they were going to do for that, put it in the Two Towers, and now you have that game as what we know. The problem is, at least I find, is that I don't think these games hold up. These games are looked at like with a lot of rosy tinted glasses, a lot of nostalgia. And I understand it because when those movies were coming out, those were the same type of vibes that people had for Star Wars when the prequels were out. Because you played the Phantom Menace game, you played the Clone Wars games or Attack of the Clones, you played the Revenge of the Sith game that everybody played because it was right before the movie. Same exact thing. The difference is, though, is that I find, at least with the Lord of the Rings games, there's a lot of like, not revisionist history, but a lot of things that are just given a pass, technically wise, with those games. Having gone through both now, and like, again, I love Lord of the Rings. I love that series. I think that the movies are awesome. Not so much The Hobbit, but like the 3 Peter Jackson
Right.
movies. But technically those games, those were from an era where you could get away with stuff like this for a licensed game, no matter what platform it was. Because remember, these games were on PlayStation 2, they were on the GameCube. I don't think they were on the Xbox, the original Xbox. I'm not sure. Like
I'll
that
look
Two
that up, but
Towers and Return of the King. I
I
know they were on GameCube. People played the GameCube version a lot and the
yeah,
PS2
I
version.
have it. I have them. I have both for the game. I have both for the GameCube. I think Return of the King. I think Return of the King might have been an Xbox. I'll take a look
because I don't remember Two Towers being on there. I do remember
Two Towers. I'm pretty sure was not.
But the thing was is that I feel like technically wise, like these games, like there's a lot of problems with them. There's a lot of collision and hit detection issues. There's a lot of difficulty spikes. There are things that fundamentally by design just are so frustrating, especially towards the later portions of the game. The second to last mission, the penultimate mission of Two Towers, like that is notorious for being like almost unfairly difficult for the stuff, because you have to face 14 waves of orcs that are coming at you while defending this one section, and some of them explode and like you're getting hit off camera.
It's brutal.
it's brutal. And like Return of the King is the same thing. The other problem I had with Return of the King, and you find it in Two Towers as well, where you get locked in these situations where you're constantly getting hit by enemies and there's no way for you to get out of them. Like you're unresponsive. Like your controls just don't do anything. Your character's locked in areas with the camera placement being weird and like little things that you just can't see, that you're kind of just getting boxed in by enemies and like, obstacles and stuff. Little things like that would not be forgiven in this day and age. Like that.
Oh,
Even
no.
I would even argue in that same era with some of those games that were being done within that same genre, we had other games that didn't have as many problems as though that just did things better. There were still also action games or hack and slash games. And it's like, I think it just really, these two games just got along on their names alone, just seriously as like an IP, because they're Lord of the Rings and it was what it was back then.
Yeah. And, so I did look it up. I guess actually they both, I didn't think, I was with you. I did not think Two Towers came out on Xbox. It says on Wikipedia, it says it did. I knew Return of the King did, but yeah, I had them both on GameCube.
Yeah, I've only seen them on GameCube and PS2.
Right. Physically. Yeah. So but whatever. Yeah, I agree. I think, it's just you go back and, again, another thing where it's like back in those days, there weren't a lot of, at that point, there were actually we had finally gotten to the point to where there were decent licensed games. And at that point, I think we'd also shifted from the idea of, oh, this is a licensed game to like, because at that point, like there's SpongeBob games and there's like
movie-based game was a thing. That was a whole thing.
Movie-based games were I think even like another category to sort of move into. And there weren't really a lot of good ones at that point, but we'd finally gotten to the point where they were decent. Like you go back to like the PlayStation 1 and 64 era.
Yeah.
Other than like GoldenEye, a lot of them were trash.
A lot of trash. I mean, you could argue,
trash.
You could argue though, in the 16-bit era, I would say like you did have licensed games that were based on films or TV shows that were pretty good. I mean, a lot of people point to stuff like, again, the Super Star Wars series for obvious reasons, even though again, that's very debated, because having replayed some of those games now and like how unfairly, ridiculously difficult they could be. We had very different guidelines back then. Let me put it this way, for quality.
But even those to be fair also, so those like, okay, but Star Wars had existed for like, that's like the early 90s, right? So it's different when, oh hey, a movie's coming out and they have to rush a game out, which was often the case. So for these to come out and even be like decent for the time, I think causes people, one, I'm with you, to look at these with a little more rose-colored glasses, and two, there's not in general a lot when you compare Lord of the Rings, when you think about how big and massive Lord of the Rings is, huge. When you compare it to say Star Wars or Batman or some of these other movie franchises, which in reality it's just as big as, there's not really that many Lord of the Rings games like in general.
A lot of them are not really known. Like those are the two that everybody remembers, but like the Fellowship of the Ring game was like an action adventure, like RPG, and even there was other ones like, what was a good one?
There's a Hobbit game.
It's a Hobbit game. But here's the one that a lot of people don't give a lot of credit to: The Third Age, which played like Star Wars Battlefront. That was literally their version of Star Wars Battlefront. Like and it's like nobody really.
I mean, it's not really until like the Shadow of Mordor games, which are great. I mean, those are great. But say you go back, I mean, you look at games that came out, because a lot of games where they came out with the movie, and this game, both of these games had it. The big deal was, oh hey, we're going to show like clips of the movie.
Exactly. Revenge of the Sith had the same thing. It was literally right before the movie came out.
Yeah, like it's sort of the selling point for it. But yeah, I'm with you. I think they're sort of because I played Two Towers, and I know the exact spot you're talking about.
Yeah, everybody knows it's the 20th.
Yeah,
like
it's so bad. Man. I played it a couple years ago when I was a lot more hardcore into collecting and like trying to build a collection. Is that I bought that. I remember everyone saying, "Oh, this game's great. This game's great." But yeah, I think it is. By today's standards, it's definitely rough around the edges. At the time, I think it's one of those things where it's like, at the time, it was probably like a 7 out of 10. And by today's standards, it's like
you go back and read some of those older reviews, because I just looked on like Metacritic just to get the links to go to see some. And like some of the things that they were saying in some of those reviews, like, y'all really probably didn't play this game, because some of the stuff that I'm seeing that's like, I got a problem with this, are like in the first couple stages. Like I can't begin to tell you, when I was making that video review on those two games, like how many times I wanted to chuck my controller in certain sections, like just dealing with things that I knew wasn't my fault because of like just how it was designed and stuff. And it's just like it's one of those things where it's like, okay, you have to kind of put yourself, like, you had to check yourself at the door. It's like, okay, this was done and made at a different time where we don't have the same level of quality of like certain games that if it was made now, we probably wouldn't see some of these things like that. And also the difference in technology. I feel like obviously the PlayStation 2 or the GameCube was very different than what we got from the PS5 or the Xbox Series X.
Oh,
Like
yeah,
there's certain things
yeah.
you couldn't do back then. That's why sometimes it's a little hard for some people to review retro games, or at least when you see people that review retro games, you can usually tell like who's been doing like, critique on retro video games for longer than who else. But it's like one of those things where it's like, okay, you check that at the door and you understand like, okay, this was on this console that was capable of this thing. Like there's a certain leeway you could give it. But then there's that one point where it's like, you know what, like enough's enough. Like this is just bad by design. It's just frustrating and annoying.
Yeah, no, yeah, I'm like 100% in agreement with you on this. That yeah, I you can tell. I mean, by today's standards, these games, they're definitely a little rough around the edges. But I'm even trying to think of like other games, in all honesty, that were. I mean, obviously, Revenge of the Sith is really good, but sort of in that era.
Batman Begins.
Batman Begins. Yeah, that's
another
another. That one's actually incredibly underrated game. I think
it's just
right, because when people think about Batman games, they just think, well, the Arkham games, right? Yeah. But man, Batman Begins, if you go back and play that game, and same thing, had footage of the movie. I think it came out maybe like a little, like just a little before, but it's another one that's actually like surprisingly good. The Spider-Man game is
Spider-Man 1 and 2 specifically.
Like yeah, Spider-Man 1 is Spider-Man 1 I actually played a lot more of. I think that's another Spider-Man game that's underrated because 2 came out and 2 is like
Two's like the greatest of all time for some people.
Right. Yeah. It's like getting the new one is like the best Spider-Man games ever.
The funny thing is like the ones that people usually go to say that are like really good, like, movie-based or license-based games like that. Like you can understand why people say that for some of them, at least a good chunk of like Spider-Man 2, like Revenge of the Sith or any of the ones that we mentioned stuff. But then there's others that I feel like are also like good in their own right that are just get completely overlooked or forgotten, like the Batman, the animated series game that's on Genesis and stuff. Yep. Not the Super Nintendo one, because the Super Nintendo and the Genesis ones, they're very different. And that was a thing with that time frame because there was usually licensed games on both platforms, but they were very different. Like Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, those are two very different. The one at Genesis plays like Street Fighter. Batman Returns is another. I love the Genesis Batman Returns. I think that game is highly underrated, and the soundtrack specifically is highly
really
underrated.
good.
But the Super Nintendo
the Sega CD version of that game is like
exactly.
That's like the
Like there's
but the Super Nintendo one is they're totally different. The Super Nintendo one is amazing too.
There's a lot of games that are like that I feel like when you really go down the rabbit hole of like what a license-based games is, you could find more gems than turds, more than likely. Even you could even go further back all the way to like Atari 2600 again with Star Wars, again with going all the way to like DOS games and stuff like again, you could find a lot out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Agreed. Okay. Is it my turn? I think it's my turn. Yeah, my turn. Okay. So okay. Yep. All right. So my number 3, my last game. So okay. So this is actually another sort of this game came out, I think I don't know when I'll look up when this version of it came out, but it's gonna be the Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 and 2.
The remake?
The remake. So I bought it when it first came out on PC. Absolutely loved it. And then I knew that it came out on Switch, but I remember I looked over because I'd always see it on sale and stuff like that. And I was kind of like, okay. Never picked it up. And it just finally was on sale. And I was like, all right, screw it. I'm going to buy it. I'm going to pick it up. And the Switch version, I'm actually shocked at how well the Switch version plays. Now, obviously, you cannot compare the Switch version
to the PlayStation,
PlayStation PC version, right? I mean, that's not even, you can't even begin. I mean, the Switch version is a lot more muddy, whatever. But it's great actually. The Switch version, it's definitely a step down, but it's still a huge step up from the original PlayStation, and 64 versions, and it's so much fun to dive back into it. And now, a lot of times I'm actually fine picking up a game on Switch, knowing that there's going to be a performance hit or whatever. Sometimes I look to see if it's like, is it still 60 frames? Is it 30 frames? Is that is that big difference going to be a thing for me? Because I actually play Switch, I'd say 90% handheld.
Yeah, that's what most people are.
Yeah, I think it's just because if I'm in my office, then I'm going to be playing my PC. I'm gaming on my PC because that's why I'm here, unless I'm like recording something or doing something else. And then I've picked up a few like little handheld emulators like the Retroid Pocket, if you're familiar, with any of those. So it's like, okay, so then if I'm playing some other games, I'm not emulating on my computer as often because I'm playing, on that. So my Switch is like 90% handheld. And then I've gotten really into finding alternative options to Joy-Cons because I hate Joy-Cons.
You got to get that Pro controller.
And I think they suck. Well, I love the Pro controller, but I actually picked up the Retro Flag.
Oh yeah, I've seen these before. A lot of people say they're really dope.
It's amazing. If you don't have it, it is, I would say, if you play in handheld, because you actually can't dock it. Even I have like a third-party dock where you can just plug right in. I have a few other Joy-Cons that are like, I forget the name of the company, but they have like actual sort of grips in the back. There's a bunch of those things. But this thing is freaking sweet because one, unlike Joy-Cons, even like good quality non-Nintendo Joy-Cons, I still always feel like unless you're using like a grip, which I do also have, I have like the Satisfy grip. My wife's Switch, she got really into Splatoon too, and then my Switch became her Switch, so I had to buy it. So I bought the OLED. So it ended up working out. But the Switch I still feel like they sort of bend sometimes a little bit, or
like this when you're holding it.
Feel that, you feel that.
Off.
So this, right? So these things, and I'm sure there's other ones too, but this one is like the GameCube one, and it's amazing. One, it has like really sick triggers, has like the GameCube style Joy thing, and like a C stick right here as well, but it locks in. So it locks in. So I'm just like, I don't know what it is, but it's totally just like changed. It's like the Switch has turned into like a completely like more.
You can play Smash Ultimate on that thing and feel good.
Absolutely, yeah. It feels infinitely more pro. Not that I want to say it's the Switch Pro, but I mean it's the OLED and it's the whatever. So and the OLED, I think switching from the old one to the OLED has now caused me to like look at games. I'm like, it's because I will say the difference in the screen is enormous.
That's what some people say.
It's way bigger than I thought it would be. One, because it's the full screen, but the screen is seriously so much better that it's a incredibly noticeable difference. So even some games end up looking better. So with all of that said, now I'm playing Tony Hawk Pro Skater on the Switch, and I even know it's like I could play this on PC and it'd look better, but it's just such a great experience. Yeah, it's such a great experience. And I mean, Tony Hawk is so great. I think actually it's perfect for the Switch because your levels are like 2 minutes or whatever.
Yeah,
and so now it's like, I can pop in, go play a couple levels while you're on the Switch, which I mostly do. Like we're on the couch at night once we've done work and we're just hanging out, whatever. But then we have a dog, so it's like, okay, gotta get up. And I have a puppy, so it's like, all right, gotta do this, gotta do that. So it's perfect. So Tony Hawk is like perfect for me to just sit down and play a little bit. And obviously, it's an amazing remake of some of the best games ever. I mean, Tony Hawk 2 is still the second highest rated game on Metacritic ever. It's like
really?
Ocarina of Time, Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2 is the top 2 video games on Metacritic.
That is super like random and surprising. Like I can understand because the one thing I will say about the 2 Tony Hawk games, especially about the remake, the originals, those were a vibe. Like I don't think that people, unless you were gaming a lot in that era, you're not going to understand like just how big Tony Hawk was back then. The first, not even just the first 2 games, the first 3, I would even argue like the first 4 games of that.
I think the first 5, because for me, I feel like they progressively got better all the way to Underground. And then I feel like
dropped.
Yeah, I feel like Underground 2 was a little bit of a drop. American Wasteland was kind of cool, and then it just kind of fell off after there.
Yeah. Once you got the board.
Right. To me, to me, Underground is the pinnacle of Tony Hawk. I think Underground is the best. But yeah, 2, 3, and 4 were all like 2 and 3 are
they were vibes back then, like because it was the soundtrack. The soundtrack helps make those games. Like the gameplay is fun. It's easy to get into skateboarding. Far better than skate, in my personal opinion. I think that skateboarding as a sport works better in the game realm as an arcade style game where it's like it's not complicated to do tricks. You're focusing more on just style as opposed to like actual technique. And I think that to me like worked out for those games. But really the soundtrack of Tony Hawk 1, like just Superman Just that the
Yeah.
whole thing, that whole again
The
that was
second
the
one had Rage Against the Machine. You know
Rage
what I
Against the
mean?
Machines. Like the music of that game, it was part of the whole culture of skateboarding
Right.
and like that alt, like late
That
'90s into early 2000s culture. It was really a vibe.
the X Games was huge. I mean, it was the right place, right time, and the different like going from 1 to 2 was also like 1 again, just what we talked about earlier with like Arkham and some of these other things. It's like,
Mhm.
man, 1 was just such a huge game. And when people say like there was nothing else like it, I mean, there was literally
Yeah,
nothing
nothing at
else like
all.
it. I
You had
mean,
Skate on the
no
NES. There you
no
go.
game, not even like it was just it came out, it was just like this, it was a completely new genre. Really. I mean, extreme
Practically.
sports games existed, but nothing like this.
There's only one game I could think of that was close to it, and it was garbage compared to Tony Hawk, and that
Was
was
like
the Dave Mirra.
oh
No,
yeah,
the Dave Mirra
but I think
games.
Dave Mirra came out after.
Yeah, it came out afterwards. That's what I'm saying. Like
Right.
that was the only other one I could think of that was like
There is
close to it.
another
It
there's
wasn't
another
good.
skateboarding game. It's like Thrasher Skate and
Oh yeah, Skate and
Destroy.
Destroy. Yeah, but that wasn't like I
It
don't
wasn't yeah,
nowhere
it
near.
wasn't yeah, nowhere close. So, but then you go from Tony Hawk 1, which is amazing, great levels, everything, Area 51 at the end, you unlock it.
Yeah,
It was like the right level of like over the
ridiculousness.
top ridiculousness, but with like arcadey, so anybody could pick it up, and there's still like really cool when you're playing as all these cool, skaters and
Real
everything.
skateboarders too. Real boarders.
Secrets, like there were
Mhm.
secrets and all this stuff. Then you get to the second game, and the second game lets you not only create a character but create a park. Like that was insane. Like now I
Mhm.
can go make whatever I want, and you can unlock Spider-Man, and it was like,
Yeah, I was
dude,
gonna
this
say
is
like the licensed
sweet.
characters that you
Like,
get in it, and then it got even more ridiculous in the next one. In part
yeah,
B, you play as Darth Maul.
yep.
It's
And
like
then
really crazy.
in Darth Maul and Wolverine, I think,
And
were
Wolverine, yeah, that's
3,
right.
and then 4 was Jango Fett
Ooh,
and
oh my god.
somebody else, Iron Man.
It's like crazy. It gets
Yeah,
ridiculous. Like that
it
whole
gets
series, so much fun.
it gets ridiculous. But having said that, they actually did kind of remake 1 and 2 on the PlayStation 3. I think maybe it was on 360. It's called Tony Hawk HD, and it was kind
Oh
of a remake,
yeah.
but it didn't do as well, and it didn't have like the same
I never played
soundtrack,
it.
and it was just like some of the levels from 1, some of the levels from 2, but like that
Hmm,
was kind of it.
hmm.
Um, but this one's like not it's not even close. So this has all the original soundtrack of
Yep,
both 1 and 2, plus some
yep,
more like modern stuff. And honestly, the soundtrack choices like fit so perfectly. Like,
yep.
you're still listening like Superman and Rage Against the Machine and all that stuff, and then it's got like Machine Gun Kelly. Um,
It
and
fits
so
the
and
culture.
it just flows so freaking perfectly. You can create a skater, all the stuff. The only criticism I have of this game is that Spider-Man isn't in it. I mean, that's it.
Yeah.
But
And keep
obviously
in
they
mind,
can't
you know
license
why we got that? Because remember, Activision at the time of those two original games,
develop the
they
Spider-Man
had the
games.
license games for Spider-Man. Exactly. Like, and it made sense because that's cross promotion between brands and stuff. But like again, even without something like that, which was a product of the time like that, these
Right.
games are still fantastic. Like if you
Yeah.
were part of that era, like playing them, you love this game. If you never got exposed to it, then you still got a bunch of dope stuff to really kind of, get an insight into what it was like back then.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I've read that there were initially plans to do the same thing with 3 and 4, but at some point they were scrapped. I think because like Activision is in the process of being acquired
Yeah.
by Microsoft, and so they're like, okay, we got to like wait and review some of that stuff. So we may see it someday. I'd say I would what they should do is they should remake 3 and 4, and they should just do like even an HD re-release of
Of Underground.
uh Underground 1 and 2. Of course, one of the biggest issues with this is licensing music, just
Yeah,
because
exactly.
you
That's
have to
got to
get
be the
all
biggest
these. Yep.
hurdle.
Yeah. Yeah, I think everything else is probably is all honestly. And I've seen interviews with Tony Hawk where he's all like, "Yeah, I'm all for it. Keep it rolling."
I mean, if they
Especially
sell,
because Tony Hawk Pro Skater 5 was trash.
yeah, so that's the
Yeah.
reason why we got these in the first place, to be honest with you,
Right.
because Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5 was so bad on release. Like it was so like bugged up and just banged up like in the worst way possible. That game was like irredeemable. Like it was
Right.
just so terrible.
Right. It looked like a game that, in all honesty, and I think that was like 30% complete.
Not even
Like it
like
it
it was
it
really
it
that
literally
bad.
it literally like if you just go look up videos of it, it literally looks like you're in a
I
dev
remember
kit.
the review
I mean,
cycle of that
seriously,
game.
like
Like
it
it's
looks
so
like you're in a
horrible.
dev kit. Like there's no other way to
Yeah,
describe like
it's terrible.
oh,
Terrible.
so bad. Awesome. Okay. What do you got? What's your last game, bro?
So my last game, I had to kind of think about this a little bit because like what would be like a really good one that would make sense to end on it. But I'll go back to retro, and it's actually one that came out just today we could talk about. Well, yeah, just today. Yeah, today specifically. Goldeneye
Oh yeah.
007, the re-release both on Xbox Series X and S and also Nintendo Switch. Because I mean, people love 007, people love and have a reverence for Goldeneye, from the N64. That game helped make the FPS genre on that console. I don't think it helped really contribute a ton to the genre as a whole when you really look at the scope of like the genre over the years over different platforms, but it really did do a lot for people that wanted to get into different types of genres for games, for multiplayer gaming, split screen multiplayer gaming, in that era. I thought it was pretty good. It also, to me, now replaying parts of it now, because I played a little bit earlier today. I did some video stuff with it for TikTok, and like there are just certain things that like we take for granted now this day and age
Right.
in FPS genre games. But like it's still like, it's a time capsule from back then, because this was like, movie license games. It was a real big pioneer for most people for that genre on that console. It had a whole vibe to it. And again, the pause music, everybody makes a big deal about, which is so good. Like that, there's a lot of good, fun things to it. So seeing it get re-released in some fashion at a time a lot of people didn't think was possible because of the licensing stuff, but it's still cool to see it. I will say though, biggest criticism, which they have to change this at some point. They need to put the online multiplayer on the Xbox version of it. Because for the Switch, apparently from people that I know that have bought it and played it on there, it's garbage because there's hardly any matches they could get into. And it's like, this game feels like it was made for Xbox Live. Like it'd be like at home to play people online split screen with that. But I digress.
I dove into it for a second today, but it feels no different than when I've emulated it. But I will say I did actually get this. They actually sent this to me. Retro Fighters.
I have that same controller. Well, I have the gray one of that.
Yeah. There's the gray one. This is the one that connects to your Switch. I did a short and TikTok about this, and man, oh my god, this thing. And I'm not just saying it because they sent it to me. It's like I would never, I'll never play N64 without it, because when you're emulating N64, I hate using an analog stick for it. I hate using an analog stick to emulate the C buttons because it just doesn't work as well. Especially like when you're playing Ocarina of Time, I'm like, hold on a second, like which way do I want to
go like this instead of just pressing the buttons is weird.
So having the actual C buttons is so much better. And then of course this analog stick here is infinitely better
than the N64
than the N64. So I like, for me, like my go-to N64 game, which I play all the time, and I play it on Switch because he doesn't really use C sticks all that much, is Wave Race. Wave Race 64 to me is still like
cool.
It's in my top 3 like favorite games ever. I play it all the time. Just I don't know why, just addicted to it. But it's like having this like analog stick, which I know that game actually emulates well. But other games, man, you need like the C stick. If you go back and try to play some of the WWE games, right?
Oh, you have to.
You want to play NWO Revenge, you got to use the buttons. And some games it's just better to have those buttons.
They were designed for that controller. They were just made for that controller.
Right. Yeah, for me, that's the case. Now, actually, oddly, GoldenEye actually had, back then it's people do it, like speedrunners use it. You can actually use 2 N64 controllers, and there's crazy controller options for it. And this existed on the N64. You can use 2 N64 controllers. Hold on one second.
Oh man, that's news to me, because I mean, I whenever I played these games, I've always just defaulted to the controls that they had on there. I really didn't mess around with the controls.
So you can use, I have 2 right here. You can use 2 N64 controllers and play like this, like with like 2 different things. It's wild, but speedrunners use it because it's better for certain levels and stuff like that. Because the biggest problem with GoldenEye is that you walk,
you have to turn
and you have to turn, but you're sort of using the C buttons to kind of either really strafe. So you really just have sort of walk and strafe. Now you have to hit the right bumper, which on the N64 controller there's only one, and that will bring up like aiming. So it's definitely a little archaic by today's
little archaic.
but people don't understand just how insanely good, because again, we say nothing like it. I mean, to go from Doom, which honestly controlled better, to this was like, it's like when Tony Hawk came out. There was nothing
Yeah, but you know
liked it to that
something,
degree.
the big contributing factor to it, one was the James Bond license, which I think was a huge, huge factor for it
The
because
most
it was
underrated soundtrack ever.
yeah, that. But also keep in mind, I think what made this game really stand out is that especially the single player levels, besides the multiplayer, which was huge in its own right, the
Right.
single player levels were pretty big, and like they were recreating scenes from the Goldeneye movie, which I think the way it was done back then, you know, for the technology at the time was really impressive to a lot of people. I mean,
Right.
jumping off the dam the first time you do it in that first stage like that, like again,
Right.
it's like you're actually doing it as James Bond. So it really stood out to a lot of people for that.
Yeah, I think also, with the multiplayer, something I think people forget, and it's I don't, you know, today I think we take it for granted because you can just hop onto like Call of Duty and Warzone and play it with like 100
Mhm.
people or whatever. But there was a big difference of like I had a PlayStation and and then I got a 64 later in its life cycle, and then I had a Dreamcast which had it, and the GameCube and like the Xbox. But man, the difference of like PlayStation only had 2 controller ports.
Yeah, and you have
Multi-taps
four.
weren't like incredibly easy to get because I
Yeah,
had it's like, yeah, and they were expensive, and you're a kid, you have a lot of money. Man, I can just, if I have an N64, I can just go over to my buddy's house, and everyone's like, bring your
yeah.
controller.
Bring your own
Was a
controller.
bring your controller, but on the N64, you can have 4 people just plug
Yep.
in, like that ease of access, that
And
friction
there were
point, right?
so many games that did that. Again, you had
Right.
GoldenEye, you had
Smash Brothers,
Smash
Mario
Brothers, you
Kart,
had Mario Kart, Mario Party, you had wrestling games like
Pokemon
Wave
Stadium,
Race,
all of
Mario.
it.
It's so many different things that could work for that. And again, a lot of the for that console anyway was built around the idea of just getting together and doing multiple like games like that with other people.
Yeah, yeah, it's insane. GoldenEye is so good. Now, I think you just I don't know if it was old or not, but it showed up in my feed. I saw you talking about Perfect Dark the other day,
Yes,
and
recently, yeah.
that's something people don't really realize because there was
Rare made
3,
the game.
right? There was 4 Pierce Brosnan Bond movies.
Movies, yeah.
I don't think Die Another Day got video games, but maybe it did.
No,
I don't.
no, no, because
He actually,
around
yeah,
that time frame, he actually had different games with him that which was Agent Under Fire and Night Fire, which
like Nightfire,
Agent Under Fire technically is not even really a Pierce Brosnan one. It's
right?
really Night Fire was the game of that
Right.
era.
But they're both those are actually like
Yeah,
pretty solid. Yeah, they're pretty solid. But so there was Tomorrow Never Dies, which is on PlayStation exclusive, and it's like third person, whatever.
it's
It's
whack.
okay. It's
In
okay.
comparison.
Right. And then there's World Is Not Enough, which
I
is like kind of
I
okay,
actually
but
like that
EA
one.
developed it. Yeah.
Mhm.
And then they're the PlayStation version is slightly different than the
Yeah,
N64 one. So, but really, like the real sequel to
it's Perfect Dark.
GoldenEye is Perfect Dark because Rare
Yeah.
made it, and it's like it just expands so much
Mhm.
into it too. And I always go back and forth about which game is actually better because I think it's one of those things where it's kind of like really Perfect Dark is the better game. I mean, if you
Yeah.
really step back and you look at it, Perfect Dark is the better game because the combat is so much more evolved. You get the railgun, you get like the laptop gun, which you can show up. It like Perfect Dark is honestly insane to really think about. Like one, it actually runs a little bit smoother than
Got the
GoldenEye, like
expansion pack.
with the expansion pack. Like it's kind of crazy to think that Perfect Dark is actually on the N64. When you talk
Yeah.
about games that like pull the most power
That's one of them.
from a system, I mean, they squeezed every single possible ounce of power out of the N64. But it's just GoldenEye's got that 007 license.
Yeah. The license could be very popular. Because James Bond is a very popular thing globally like that. But
Right.
even so, just the idea, like, even if it wasn't like the best Bond stuff for that game, just the fact that they were able to recreate some of those scenes from the movie, because at the time it was so
Mhm.
popular back then, like in the way that they did it, and it was actually good for a lot of people, that's what made that game. And then everything else just compounded upon it.
Yeah. And then the multiplayer, you get to play as like Baron Samedi and Oddjob,
Odd
who I don't
job.
know is gonna, play as Oddjob. I guess they initially one of the things they wanted was actually have different versions of Bond, but
Exactly. I was just gonna say.
they couldn't pull it off.
There's a licensing thing, but it would have been cool because then you would have been able to play as like your favorite Bond between all the
Right.
ones up to that point up with Brosnan. And I
Right.
think that would have been sweet. I
Yeah.
wish they actually made a better effort to do that because I think if now these days, I think we could see something like that happen more like actually like come to
Easily. Yeah.
fruition compared to back then. Because back then, a lot of it had to do with, the way that games were looked at as an art form and as a marketing
Right.
tool for a lot of things. And then keep in mind, like a lot of people back then that just didn't understand games the way that they do now, especially like people like
Yeah.
Sean Connery or Roger Moore, even back then. Like it's just a lot of stuff with it.
Yeah, gaming was a huge industry, but it's not like it is today. I mean,
Yeah.
they're
It's
totally
not as
different.
respected as it is now.
Yeah.
I guess.
Who's your favorite Bond?
It, my favorite, because it's hard because my Bond is Pierce Brosnan because that's the Bond I grew up with.
Right.
Even though I know Sean Connery is the GOAT and he's always been the
Right.
GOAT. One who I always thought was like really highly underrated, and it's not even his fault. Richard was it Dalton?
Timothy Dalton.
Timothy Dalton. I said Richard Dalton.
Yeah.
Timothy Dalton, because I feel like he had some really good elements to his Bond that just get
Yeah.
overshadowed by everything else.
He was actually supposed to be the Bond for Goldeneye, and they were supposed to do
Yeah.
it a couple years there. And I kind of look at it now. And I'm like, yeah, Timothy Dalton would have been really good. My favorite Bond is actually Roger Moore. I don't know what it is. I don't know.
I look at him as a funny Bond. He's a funny Bond, but he's a classy, stylish Bond.
Yeah,
Like
I don't know why. I've just always. It's just he's always.
and the funny thing is, there's no right answer to this because everybody
no.
like debates about this all the time. It's like the cool thing about all the different Bonds, unlike like all the different Batmans and like a lot of other people that play Superman and stuff, all the different Bonds have something unique and like awesome about them that makes them stand out from their era. Like, because Sean Connery, you can say what you want. Sean Connery started the role, but he did so many movies as Bond that did stuff for that character that actually were like things that started off that bled over into the other Bonds afterwards. Like that. But then you could say the same thing about Roger Moore. Roger Moore, I felt like he was not only the funny Bond where he had a good sense of humor, but he was all about class. And then Dalton was a little bit more brutal, the brutality of Bond from the Ian Fleming books. And then Pierce Brosnan is like a blending of like everything, but made for the 90s. Like that type of Bond. Like it was just so many good things.
And some of the guys who've done more, you know, they have good movies and like bad movies. Like not all of Sean Connery's Bond.
Oh no, he's got stinkers.
Like, he's got
Thunderball.
Yeah, I mean, Die Another Day to me is like absolute trash. But I still think, and you know, some people will say, "Oh, it's because you guys are gamers, you're fans of the game." But I still argue to this day that Goldeneye is the best Bond movie. I think it is like a lot of Bond movies. When you sort of look at things, like some of them have like some things that like some aspects that are really good. Like sometimes the gadgets are too over the top. Sometimes the gadgets are just like are too basic. It's like no Bond, and so I still to this day feel like Goldeneye is like the perfect blend.
It's like a good medium.
Like it's the good medium of everything, and it's Pierce Brosnan's first one, and he's like just
he knocks it out the park. He is a dope Bond in that movie. Yeah. Like he's good. I think he got better.
He's good. Yeah, he's good in his 3 movies, and then Die Another Day was just like
it's just like bleh.
It's just like afterwards. Halle Berry's not a Bond girl. It's like I'm out, you know. Like, but I'm not dissing Halle Berry. She's just not a Bond girl.
We love Halle Berry out here, but like that movie, you guys got to understand. They got Madonna to do the music for, which wouldn't be a big deal. But then she wanted a part in the movie. It's like, come on now, like this is becoming more of a marketing movie than it is a Bond movie.
Yeah. Crazy. Okay. All right. Well, hey, man, that's great. So much fun talking to you. Glad we got to make this happen. So much fun. So, hey, where can people find you on the internet?
I am literally everywhere. You could find me on YouTube, youtube.com/@JakeJamesLugo, because I know YouTube is using the tags now. You can find me on Twitter @JakeJamesLugo. You can find me on TikTok @JakeJamesLugo. I'm also on Instagram @JakeJamesLugo as well. And then you could also find me on Patreon, patreon.com/JakeJamesLugo. I put exclusive content on there that you're not going to find on YouTube or anywhere else, but I also give early access to a lot of my stuff, a lot of my video reviews, a lot of my other content. I'm posting literally almost every day on TikTok at this point. I'm posting all the time on Twitter and then on Instagram, like sharing stuff around. It's just keeping the conversation about games going with everybody all over the place. So check it out, follow on there, show some love. And again, trust me, you'll find something that you'll get a kick out of.
Yeah, no, it's great. You're doing new stuff, you're doing retro stuff, all the stuff. It's absolutely great. So awesome. So much fun. Glad we could make this happen. So
of course,
guys, remember you can find me anywhere on the internet at SuperGainsBros, and of course right here on the Box Trick Podcast. So with that, as always, guys, thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.